The living room door slammed shut. A $500,000 check was slid across the table, and a statement so cold it froze the air was uttered. "Sign it, or we're calling 911. In just a few minutes, a family argument had turned into blatant extortion, where two elderly people used both emotional and legal pressure to back their son into a corner. But they didn't know that every threat, every word just spoken, was being recorded, and a silent call had already connected to a lawyer. The one being coerced wasn't a helpless child, but Ethan Carter, who had prepared a trap right in his own home. And just a few minutes later, the entire power dynamic was reversed, and the threateners became the ones questioned by the law. If you were Ethan, caught between family and the truth, would you sign, or would you turn the tables? The living room was sealed, the half-drawn curtains stopping the yellow light in mid-air, unable to spread. The air thickened, heavy as if something was pressing down on your chest. Linda pushed the check toward Ethan Carter, her finger stopping right on the number. $500,000. Sign it, or I'm calling 911. Her voice was low, each word clear, needing no volume to make the room shrink. Ethan stood still, feeling as if the distance between him and the door behind him had just stretched a little further. Richard Carter stepped forward, standing just behind Linda, a position that blocked the line of sight, enough to turn everything into a 2-against-1 ordeal. He crossed his arms, looking down at Ethan. "That money exists because of us." The statement landed, needing no further explanation, like an unwritten rule Ethan had to accept. The sounds began to quiet down, leaving only the steady, cold tapping of Linda's fingernails on the tabletop. Ethan didn't look up, his gaze fixed on the check, the number seeming to glow under the light. He knew this was no longer a normal conversation. It was a demand wrapped in pressure. Linda leaned in slightly, her voice sharper. "After all these years we spent raising you, you're going to keep it for yourself?" Richard didn't wait for a reaction. He picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with 911 already dialed. A light touch of his finger was all it would take to make the call. "Just one call, you're finished." He didn't look at Ethan as he spoke, as if the outcome had already been decided. Outside, the sound of a car driving past slipped through the crack of the door, a completely different rhythm of life. The streetlights were probably still on, people were still heading home, maybe even laughing and talking. No one knew that in this room, a struggle was unfolding silent, yet so tense that a single wrong word would shatter everything. Ethan took a slow breath, then placed his phone face down on the table, the movement so light it was almost silent. He looked up, meeting his parents' eyes directly for the first time. His gaze was no longer conflicted. "Are you sure about this?" The question wasn't loud, but it was enough to make Linda's hand pause for a beat. No one answered right away. The space stood still for a brief moment, long enough for Ethan to feel every beat of his own heart. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and picked up the pen. The tip touched the paper, but stopped before any ink could emerge. Ethan looked up, his voice calmer than before. "I sign it, and then what?" The question hung in the air, with no one rushing to answer. And for the first time, Ethan realized that what they wanted might not just be the money on that check. The yellow light in the living room still cast its glow on the check, but in Ethan Carter's eyes, everything started to blur. The sounds around him receded, the tapping of fingernails, Linda's breathing, Richard's voice, all of it slowly fading as if being pulled away. Another image forced its way in, clearer, colder. An old kitchen appeared in his memory, a low-hanging white light illuminating every scratch on the wooden table. Ethan, at that time, was standing near the sink, still holding a pay envelope. Linda walked over, not asking, just holding out her hand. "Your salary, hand it over." Her voice then was exactly like it was now, even, firm, leaving no room for argument. Ethan said nothing and handed her the envelope. Linda's hand touched it and pulled sharply, as if she was afraid he'd change his mind. The envelope left Ethan's hand so easily that even he realized he had never tried to hold on to it. Richard stood in the background, leaning against the wall, watching the scene as if it were normal. He didn't approach, nor did he need to say much. Just one sentence was enough to frame everything. "You'd have nothing without us." The words fell, not loudly, but thick and heavy. They didn't stay in the kitchen. They followed Ethan out of the house, followed him through the days that came after, repeating in his head every time he held money, every time he thought of keeping something for himself. The memory shifted, as quick as a blink. Ethan saw himself at a bus stop. It was dark, and the billboard above was blindingly bright. People walked past him, talking, laughing, rushing home. No one knew he had just given his entire salary to his family. No one knew he was living on the meager leftovers. As if it were a habit, he stood there, hands in his pockets, empty in the truest sense of the word. The sounds of the present pulled him back. The soft scrape of a chair, Linda's sharp inhale. The phone under his hand vibrated once, very faintly. Ethan glanced down. The screen lit up with a text message. Daniel Brooks. I'm watching. A short sentence, enough to change something inside Ethan. For the first time, this story was no longer just about him and them. Ethan looked up. His eyes were no longer fixed on the check. He looked directly at Linda, then at Richard, slowly, as if rearranging everything in his mind. The old words were still there, the images were still there, but this time, they no longer weighed him down. He spoke, his voice even and clear. I understand now. Everything. The room was the same, the check still lay on the table, but the power dynamic had begun to shift. And for the first time, Ethan was no longer the one being cornered. The moment Ethan's words ended, the atmosphere in the room reversed. Linda didn't wait another second. She reached out and snatched the pen from his hand. The sound of plastic hitting the tabletop was dry and sharp. Don't play games. Sign it. Her voice was higher now, having lost the control she had at the beginning. Ethan didn't look down anymore. He held his posture, looking straight at Linda, then shifted his gaze to Richard. The distance between them was the same, but the feeling was different. Richard took a step forward, so close that Ethan could clearly see the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Just sign it. And it's over. Ethan shook his head very slightly. It's not that simple anymore. At that exact moment, the sound of the door swinging open echoed, making everyone turn. Light from the hallway flooded in, cutting through the yellow haze of the living room. Officer Mark Reynolds stepped inside, his eyes quickly scanning each person before landing on the check in the middle of the table. We received a report about a disturbance. Linda was the first to react. She took half a step forward, her voice quick and urgent. He stole our money. Ethan didn't wait. That's false. Richard interjected, his voice heavier, trying to remain calm. He has to return it. It's family money. Officer Reynolds didn't rush to a conclusion. He took another step, standing between the three of them. His position inadvertently dividing the room into two sides. On one was Ethan, on the other, Richard and Linda. He looked at the check, then at Ethan. Is anyone here being forced to sign documents? Ethan glanced around the room, his eyes sweeping over each face, each position, as if confirming where he stood. This room was once a place where he had no voice, but now, everything was changing. He spoke clearly without hesitation. I am. Linda shot back instantly, her voice sharp. He's lying. Ethan didn't turn to her. He reached down to the table and flipped his phone over. The screen lit up, its white light cutting through the murky yellow space of the room. I've been recording the entire conversation from the beginning. No one said anything for a short second. Richard stood frozen, his lips pressed into a thin line. Linda took half a step back, her expression shifting from anger to alarm. Officer Reynolds held out his hand. Let me see it. Ethan looked at that hand, then back at his phone's screen. He didn't hand it over right away. He kept the device, his fingers tightening their grip slightly. Not yet. The response made the air in the room stand still again. Officer Reynolds frowned slightly. Richard and Linda exchanged a quick glance, no longer as certain as before. Ethan took a slow breath, his gaze unwavering. He knew he was at a point of no return. And this time, he wasn't going to back down. There was something else waiting, something bigger, clearer, that no one in this room had truly seen yet. Ethan Carter looked at Officer Reynolds' outstretched hand for another beat, then slowly turned his phone to face forward. The screen was clearly lit, no longer hidden. On it, a call was still connected, a small icon pulsing steadily. He said, his voice so calm. It seemed detached from the emotions that had just unfolded. This is all being live-streamed to my lawyer. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Linda froze, her eyes glued to the screen, as if she had just seen something completely beyond her calculations. The yellow light from above now shone directly on her face, revealing her tension. Turn it off. Her voice cracked, completely losing the control she had at the beginning. She took a step forward, then stopped, as if realizing that any action now could be recorded. Officer Reynolds no longer maintained a neutral tone. He looked from the screen to Ethan, then turned to Richard and Linda, his gaze hardening. If there has been coercion and threats, this is a serious legal matter. He spoke slowly, enunciating each word, without needing to raise his voice. That statement drew a new line in the room, a line that hadn't existed before. Richard Carter stood motionless, his hands hanging limp at his sides. for the first time not immediately interjecting or reacting. His gaze faltered, as if he were recalculating everything that had just happened. He opened his mouth, but couldn't form a complete sentence. His earlier certainty had vanished, replaced by a palpable, gaping void. Ethan didn't look at him for long. He gestured lightly toward the check on the table, his voice still steady. They threatened to make a fake 911 call to force me to sign. He didn't embellish, didn't emphasize, he just stated the fact as it was. The sentence hung in the air, undisputed. Linda opened her mouth, then closed it, as if realizing that any explanation now would only make things worse. The check was still in the middle of the table, where it had been from the start. But now, it was no longer the center of the room. No one touched it, and no one looked at the number on it again. The power that piece of paper once held had vanished, right before the eyes of all three of them. Linda took another step back, her hands falling to her sides. Her gaze shifted from tense to something harder to name. She looked at Ethan, no longer as sharp as before. "You've destroyed this family." Her voice was lower, no longer demanding, but more like a belated accusation. Ethan looked at her, not flinching. He didn't answer right away. A short silence fell, long enough for everything in his mind to run through one last time. Then he spoke, slowly and clearly. "Family doesn't start with money." The statement wasn't loud, but it was decisive, like a line being drawn. Officer Reynolds noted down some information, his voice returning to a professional rhythm, but his eyes remained attentive. No one else said anything. Richard turned away, his gaze avoiding everyone. Linda stood still, neither advancing nor retreating. Ethan held his phone, the screen still lit, the call still active. He glanced at it, then turned the screen off. He didn't need to check again. He knew everything had been fully recorded. He walked out of the living room, through the hallway, and opened the door. The air from outside rushed in, cooler and clearer. The sound of cars on the street returned, steady, familiar, as if nothing had ever happened in the house behind him. Ethan paused for a second on the doorstep without turning back. The phone vibrated lightly in his hand. He opened it, and a text message from Daniel Brooks appeared. "We can sue." Ethan stared at those words for longer than usual. His finger hovered over the screen, not replying immediately. Behind him, the door was still open, but he didn't step back. He walked down the steps, merging into the outside air, where everything continued as usual. He had won, but something had just been left behind, and he knew there was no way to get it back. The story of Ethan Carter isn't just about a family confrontation. It's a clear reminder of the line between kinship and control. When money is placed above respect, even the closest relationships can fracture. Ethan won not through force, but through clear-headedness, by understanding his rights and daring to stand up at the right moment. The lesson to be learned isn't about who was right or wrong, but that each person must realize their self-worth cannot be determined by pressure or manipulation, even when that pressure comes from their own family. Enduring in silence is not filial piety, and unconditional surrender is not how you maintain a lasting relationship. This story opens up a broader perspective. Many people out there may be living in similar situations, being financially controlled or emotionally pressured, yet think it's normal. Being aware, understanding the law, and knowing how to protect yourself doesn't make you ungrateful. It helps you preserve your own value. If you put yourself in Ethan's shoes, would you choose silence to keep the peace? Or would you speak up to protect what is yours? And if one day you found yourself on the other side, would you unknowingly cross a line you didn't realize was there? If this story made you think, please share it so that more people can learn from it. Thank you for following, and I promise to bring you stories that are increasingly deep and valuable. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more inspiring stories.